think we've all dreaded this moment for a long time. Passover wasn't as impossible to imagine because we had just started, and the Seder lends itself to a different kind of engagement. But on Rosh Hashanah, the high holidays, it was perhaps too hard to imagine not being able to participate with your friends and family in shul. I remember mid-June, the numbers started to go down. Started talking about reopening. What does it look like? What are we going to do for high holidays? And I steadfastly held to the belief that unless it's gone, this is not a safe place for everybody. I'm not saying that I'm right, but it's clear and obvious that even in the last few weeks, everything's changed again. You might have seen that interview I did on the CBC in which I said, as I had said previously in a sermon, I'll give my heart, I'll give my soul, but I won't give my life. And we should feel the same way, because Judaism does not ask us to give our lives, not for this. And friends, I feel like I can't really call what I'm doing today a sermon because you're all somehow managed to fit into this little tiny camera. And it's lonely, it's far, but I see you and I feel you. And we're connected. And we've been doing this for 6 months now. And I've been dreading this moment, all these moments. Just coming to shul, on Rosh Hashanah morning, and no police, no energy, nobody in the parking lot, nobody complaining yet. It's a hard thing for all of us. I hope that the offering that we have provided today will bring some comfort because we're trying to connect in the best way we know how, exquisitely, trying to make it as beautiful as possible. Not for me, but for you. Now, we've been having a lot of conversations, and if you haven't followed, what you've missed, perhaps, is that we've changed. A little less formal, a little less structured. I feel less inclined to be light, at the same time, not a downer. I just like to talk what I understand and what I see. We're not particularly political. I don't feel that it's a good use of our time. I say that I feel the best use of our time is to teach values and ideas and let people make their own decisions through the right origin thoughts. And just like I don't feel today is a sermon, I feel it's more of a conversation, because truth is, you can't really give a sermon to nobody. But you can speak to somebody, because I know I'm speaking to my congregation. And I know that since we started, we said, with the full support of our board and executive, we said, everybody is coming back. There will be no such thing as I can't come because I can't afford it, or I'm ashamed, or I'm uncomfortable. It can't be. And then we reached out to various people, and everybody, in fact, and people of all means, all levels of capacity, donated to our Dignity Fund, whether it was $18 or $10,000. You've all chosen to remain anonymous, which is the right thing to do for a Dignity Fund. but you've allowed people to come to shul who otherwise could not. And you've allowed the shul to retain its own fiscal dignity and be able to conceive of itself as a congregation, not just because people renew, but because people care about those they can't even talk to or see and will never know that they were either a recipient or a donor. That's what makes this a community. So it's not truly a sermon, it's a conversation, and it is no longer fair to imagine that shuls have dues, but rather contributions. Everybody who has contributed is part of us. We asked for contributions. We asked even people that could barely afford it to see, for their own sake, what would you like to do? And people generously, at their own scale, said, I want to participate. I don't think in the future we're ever going to call it dues again. I mean, it might be listed as dues, because that's what's on our balance sheet. But the truth is, it's not due. It's voluntary. It's a contribution, not the amount. That's not voluntary. That's set by board executive and our financial demands. But what is voluntary is you choosing to be here. And I am proud this morning to tell you, and if you get the National Post, you probably saw an article about me written by the great Barry Averich. And I don't know, I'm still laughing. It's a good read if you get a chance. It's online as well. But Barry Averich was wrong. Doesn't happen that often, but he was wrong. When I interviewed with Barry in the summer, we talked about our hopes for the shul. I talked about my hope for renewal. And the executive and I, we lost sleep all regularly. And we watched our numbers creep up and up and up. And we watched our volunteers constantly contacting, engaging, reaching out. I couldn't speak to everybody directly, but we try to at least connect with everybody. I hope you all received your high holiday bag from us. It's a mere token of the fact that you are missed, every one of you. And Barry Averich was wrong because when he wrote the article, he said 95% renewal at Beth Torah. That's wrong. Sorry. It's 96% renewal at Beth Torah. 96% of our congregation have voluntarily chosen to come back. That is why we call it a community. That is extraordinary. Now, what you've seen on the live stream, I want you to know, is kind of just the beginning. Tomorrow, there's obviously shofar. Today, there's not because there's no today there's no shofar because it's Shabbat, so we don't blow the shofar on Shabbat, but tomorrow there's additional pieces to our service. And Yom Kippur, as mentioned, we are delighted that Hila Plitman, a Grammy Award-winning Israeli-born singer who lives in LA, will be joining us for High Holidays virtually, singing Kol Nidre and other pieces of music. We are incredibly graced and lucky to have her join us, along with Constanza Beckman and Itai Shapira. And with regards to pandemic, we've talked a lot about it. Weekly, talked about the guidance. We know that just mere days ago, the guidance has shifted yet again. Everything's changed yet again. There's an uptick, and people are being asked to be safe. We did not want to make anyone make a choice. We did not want to have to decide whether you're older or younger or well or not well. We want everyone in their best dignity at home with their family and friends, enjoying what we do. Memories of being together, hopefully soon we'll be back. Hopefully this is a one-year blip in our lives. And I was struck by an obituary I read, a man named George Bezos, who defended Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela spoke 3 words when he was on trial, and they were at the behest of his lawyer, Mr. Bezos, who begged him not to speak as strongly as he wanted to. And when we know about the corrupt South African legal system, where it seemed to be following all the law, but it was entirely intended to achieve their ultimate goal of racist differentiation. Mr. Mandela was giving testimony about the various crimes he was accused of. And he basically was suggesting that he was willing to die for his ideals. And he was willing to die for what he believed the rights and freedom of all individuals were, especially black South Africans. And he said, "I am willing to die." And Bezos asked him, please put in, "if need be." And he put in the words, "if need be," so as not to taunt the South African justice system that would have called for the death penalty. Rather than say, "I'm willing to die," he said, "if need be." It's a small distinction, but it may have saved his life. And friends, I have to tell you that while to you, you may not know anyone who has corona, you may not know anyone who contracted it, you may not know someone who died from it, I'm the recipient of a lot of news and information. And I know firsthand it's now gone up. It's probably close to 30 people throughout my world and my parents' world and friends and across North America and Israel who have died from corona before their times. Younger, older. I've had nephews that have contracted corona. I have family members. They're mostly okay. Most of them were young. But it's a huge struggle, especially now with kids going back to school. It's become hugely challenging for us to determine what is "if need be." Are you willing to sacrifice your life for whatever you feel is unsustainable, or is it going to be on a "if need be" basis? Many of you are living on an "if need be" basis. You will only go out if need be. You will only attend events if need be. You will only do things if need be. But many of you have probably experienced, others for sure, who are living on, I'm okay to die. Or not even okay. I'm ignoring the fact that I might. Or worse, which is really the real issue that needs to be addressed regularly, which is it's not about you. It's about what you can do to someone else. How does your behavior impact someone else? Forget you. That's your business. But someone else? Everyone else? That's what we're talking about. We are talking about living on an "if need be" basis. And "if need be" requires you to ask yourself, do I really need to put others at risk? I recognize that it's more and more difficult, and we've talked about this over the weeks, the progression of the pandemic, and how difficult it is now that we've started to segregate by age, schools reopening, and so on. And that was fundamentally what is happening at Shul, where we would literally have to say people over a certain age should not come. People under a certain age should not come. Who wants to do that? Who wants to have a Shul where you tell people not to come? I'd rather we all have the same experience. I'd rather we do it at home until we can all be here. Soon, I hope. Now, I have to talk today about the reading that we came across this morning. There are 2 readings. The first is the story of Sarah and Hagar, And then the second is about Hannah and Peninnah, her rival. They were both married to Elkanah. And all the stories revolve around parents and children and the conditional or unconditional love of spouses, children, and how people deal with their concerns and their issues. So how people deal with their concerns and their issues with regards to spouses and parents makes up the bulk of the conversation in these three readings. And I know that some of you may want to hear more current issues. We've got a lot of holiday to go through still. But I need to talk to you about what is most current for me, and that are these three women that appear in our reading today, and how each and every one of them is a powerful narrative for our moment, for today. Stories that took place almost 4,000 years ago are archetypal for the moment that we are in. First, let's deal with the anger of Sarah. Sarah is the primary wife of Abraham. In those days, there was that kind of distinction. And she can't have children, and Hagar, his second wife, has a child named Ishmael. And when Sarah finally gets pregnant miraculously, what does she do? The first thing she does is says, I'm not happy. And when she has a son, she names it Isaac, Yitzchak, because Yitzchak means absurdity. Who in their right mind would imagine having a child at that advanced age? And then she sees Ishmael, the second wife's child, who is older by 13 years, playing with their son. And whatever that means, Sarah blows a gasket. Sarah shows her anger, and she makes Abraham toss Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert where he almost dies. And that's the story of today. God judges Ishmael Basher Husham as he is there, meaning we judge an individual on who they are in the moment. The anger of Sarah causes this terrible rupture in a home, and as I mentioned earlier, the friction between Ishmael and Isaac. And then we come across Hagar. The scene switches to the desert in which Hagar is sitting on the ground. She's laid her child under a bush in some shade, whatever she could find. The water has run out. The bread has run out that Abraham sent her out with, a measly offering. And now she's about to die, and her son is about to die from thirst. And she says, I cannot watch this moment. And she goes away like the rabbis, like the Torah tells us, the distance of a bow shot, how far a bow, so it's a few hundred yards. And she says, Al ereh b'mot hayeled, I can't watch my child perish. Vatisa et kola vatefk, and she began to weep. She began to cry. So we have the anger of Sarah leading us to the anguish of Hagar. And sure enough, Ishmael has his own miracle, and he's saved, and he gets his own blessing. And then we have Hannah, the mother of the prophet Samuel, who is downtrodden and abused by her husband, who doesn't value her quest for children. And she has a second wife to deal with, who berates her for being the favorite one, but who cannot produce a child. And she goes to the temple and she prays, and she ends up giving birth. But in the moment that she's praying at the temple, she does something so extraordinary that the high priest, who proves himself ultimately to be an inept leader, the high priest Eli, is so astonished by her behavior, he thinks she's drunk. What is she doing? She's praying, but her lips are not moving. She's feeling. She comes to the altar, and she doesn't do what everyone does, which is speak out loud, say to the priest, I'm feeling awful. She begins to pray quietly. It turns out it may be quiet in words, but she's an activist. She's an activist in one of the most powerful ways imaginable. And she says to Eli, I am not drunk. You see the move in my lips? The little bit of movement, you don't hear any sound? Is that what you're worried about? Eli, I have things in my heart. And she says, in what I think is one of the greatest moments of poetry in our entire Torah, she says, I came here to ask for help. Va'eshpoch et nafshi. And I poured out my soul on the altar. My offering is not oil, nor is it wine, nor is it incest, nor is it money, nor is it an animal's blood. It is my soul. I poured out my soul on the altar. And that, she is saying, a woman turns to a man who is clearly misogynistic. And he says to him, your narrative is about showing how you feel. And my narrative is about feeling what I feel. And I came to this place not to please you, high priest, not to please the viewers, not to please the masses. I came to pour out my soul as my libation for this altar. I will leave this altar dripping in my pain and my suffering, but I do not have to speak it aloud. I'm allowed to feel it. The activism of Hannah changed Jewish prayer forever. When you are in silent Amidah, it's because Hannah was silent. There's so much power in the silence. And let me tell you, the silence is not deafening. It's just painful. First week I said l'chaim. I only heard an echo of me. That was painful. I asked you to send pictures in, and you did. Together, we've been finding ways, because we can't speak, to feel. And we've done so in so many little ways, to our families, to our friends, to strangers. Each one of us has a responsibility to everybody, and we're living up to that. And this community at 96%. It's extraordinary. So the anger of Sarah, the anguish of Hagar, and the activism of Hannah teach us there are many ways to express yourself. You can pour out your wrath, you can pour out your tears, but Hannah poured out her soul. I read a story in the Wall Street Journal that talked about how theme parks were going to reopen in Japan. And when they said the theme parks were going to reopen in Japan, they put up a notice that said, due to coronavirus, screaming is not allowed. You will have to scream in your hearts. we are all of us, in some ways, we are all screaming in our hearts. But we've learned, like Hannah, to feel our feelings and to speak our empathy, to feel inside what we need to feel. We don't have to act it out. We can still care. We can still do. We can still worry about others more than ourselves. We can still remember that there are lessons in this moment that will go down in history, but will also change us forever. And you need to embrace the moment. I read an article about Gen Xers, 1965 to 1980. If you were born in that time frame, supposedly you are the most disaffected, most disappointed, most upset, most anxious group of society. Well, guess what, Gen Xers? We're also the people who are most likely to not get corona symptoms and death, but we are the most likely not to follow the rules other than kids. There's something in Gen X, apparently, but it doesn't matter. What really matters is, if indeed you are part of a generation that is anxious and is disaffected and is disappointed and still recovering from your financial losses of the last depression, if that's who you are, this is your moment, and this goes for everybody. This goes for everybody. Gen Y, Gen Z, doesn't matter. Gen XX, Gen YX, Gen makeup, whatever you want. Every single one of us is living in a moment, and as I said from day one, and I will continue saying, it's your moment. Embrace it. Make it the best you can. You will never, ever, ever regret being great at this time in your life. It will be a memory that you will treasure, because soon, someday, I don't know when, it will be over. And only you will know who you were when it wasn't over. Truth be told, I miss everybody. I miss you all. I am proud of our congregation. I'm truly, truly proud. Don't get caught up in the shtick. Yeah, it's lights, camera, true. But what's it for? It's not for me. I want to fulfill my goal. I want to be really, really, really good to my congregation, for my congregation. But really what I want is that my congregation should be great. And you are. I miss you all. Shana Tova. A happy, healthy, sweet year. We'll be back in a few minutes for conclusion of services.